Friends, Tennesseans, countrymen, lend me your ear. You're listening to The Matt Murphy Show, and I'm not Matt Murphy. I'm Cameron Smith. I hope you guys have enjoyed listening to Chris out there in Arizona. I'm really interested. I think Turning Point has a very important mission of getting the next generation of conservatives engaged. And if you're somebody who fits that bill and has changed your perspective because of that organization, I'd love to hear from you. This show's about you guys. I can't tell you how excited I was when I got up this morning. I was in my men's Bible study at 6 o'clock, and I said, man, I'm excited. I get to fill in for Matt this week, and you guys make the show worth having. It is so much fun to engage. You guys know the drill. The call in 615-737-9986. You can text in, same number, 615-737-9986. We got a lot of stuff to talk about today over the next several hours. First of all, happy holidays, Merry Christmas. There's still time to buy things for your significant people. Some of you have already asked, what's my day job? Because y'all hear me on Wednesdays with Matt, and I engage, and y'all know that I'm with the Tennessean. I'm a columnist over there, a member of the editorial board. I also work at a company called Thanks in Franklin. It is a company that's all about gratitude in business. It's small gestures of appreciation. I've learned a lot from those guys. And one of the things that I want y'all to think about this holiday season as we get started, how many of y'all have Christmas gifts that you're just going to leave in the closet? That over Christmas, you're going to wrap them, put them in the closet. Well, most of you, probably not many of you say, yeah, that's how I do it. When we don't express appreciation for the folks in our lives, it's like doing that. You know, Belle's producing the show. I appreciate Belle. I mean, there's less of Belle these days than there used to be. But when you don't tell people that you appreciate them, it's like wrapping a Christmas present and sticking it in the closet. Don't be that person.
Thank you.
Yeah, I want you to know that, man. I also want to start off with the holiday season for Christmas, the lights of Lebanon. If you guys have not done this thing, this is a family tradition for us in the Smith family. We go to Lebanon. It's about an hour drive. And we go see, it's at the Ag Center out there, all the lights. It's a lengthy process. The endeavor was 6 hours. And I listened to the same holiday Christmas track, including Frozen, 4 times over that period of time. And so I am thoroughly ready for the holidays. I hope you are too. I want, text in. Let me know some of your traditions, the things that are there. My mother, Karen Smith, wonderful woman. The other annual tradition that we have coming up is Mom's Christmas card pictures. There are like 20 of our people in the area. And so when we do family Christmas card pictures, it's utter chaos. Like, imagine just trying to get a couple people to look in the same direction. Oh, no. When we do the family pictures, it's like, can you keep them in the same field? It's just wild. So I hear all of you guys that are out there. We're winding down the year, and I'm super excited. I'm going to try, because I'm filling in for Chris a little bit next week, Matt this week, to bring in some normal folks. A lot of times we bring in politicians and other folks that they have their talking points, all that sort of stuff. I want to hear from you guys. You guys make the show worth listening to, and I'm going to see if I can even bring in some of the beasts, because they're out of school, and one of the things that I wanted to talk about is, what teenagers are up against right now. I mean, that's a really relevant thing for a lot of families, like how all this stuff we're talking about in the news impacts them, because it does. I was talking with my oldest, who's 14, and he was talking about screens and the things that they're dealing with in high school, and it just struck me that some of that stuff's really relevant to a lot of you folks that are listening, and I'd really like to have that basically have that conversation on the air. So we'll probably do that at some point. The big story here that I think we need to just lead in with is, are Trump and Haley headed for a showdown? I want to start because you guys know that I say it and I mean it, that when it comes to Trump, I try to be honest. A lot of policies I like, judges I loved. The character and chaos I don't. But I started digging. I've got a piece over at AL.com. And it's how Republicans have learned to stop worrying and love the Trump. And I know where you're going with this. I'm sure Ray's out there somewhere thinking, well, this is where Cameron launches on here's why somebody's better than Trump. I'm not going to do that. I think this is really important, and it really helped me realize what's going on here. Because I just couldn't get it, right? I can make a pretty rational case for why DeSantis or Haley make more sense, or a safer conservative bet to win back the White House in 2024. And I've done that, and I can tell you the rational argument. Let's start off with the good news for Republicans. Joe Biden is terrible. There's just not another way to say that. He's not a good candidate at all for a number of reasons.
Mr. Wise guy over here.
Yes, very wise. I looked at Real Clear Politics polling averages, 538. Other folks do this kind of stuff, but this was interesting. At the same point in their respective administrations, Trump's favorability was 4 points higher than Biden's is right now. Obama was half a point even higher than that. And Bush was 13 percentage points higher. So Joe Biden is dragging the bottom of the barrel in terms of his approval rating. Inflation is still a big issue. We can talk about how inflation has moved in a better direction, but it hasn't come back down. So inflation's not as high, but we're not heading in the direction that we need to head. Biden has engaged in 2 foreign wars. Like, let's be honest about that. Regardless how you feel about things in Ukraine, regardless about how you feel about things in Israel, we are engaged. You can call it proxy or however you want to handle it, but we're engaged in 2 theaters, and there's not a game plan. That's been my biggest issue with how Biden's handled all this. No game plan. We'll talk about it a little later today, but the southern border this is laughable if it weren't actually dangerous. And they're related because we have these 2 wars going on. That makes people not like us. And then we have porous borders that nobody seems to take seriously in the Biden administration. And then, let's be honest, Biden's resilience and his capacity are in question. There's not another nice way to say that. He's really old, and it's impacted him. And you can look at him, you can listen to him, and judge it for yourself. You don't need me to explain to you that this is going poorly. This is interesting information that some of you may not know. For a long time, it was, well, Trump was way up high, then there's DeSantis kind of in the middle, and then Haley, and then the others. Actually, what's happening right now, and this is head-to-head matchups versus Biden, each of the top 3 that I mentioned have credible polling that puts them ahead of Biden. DeSantis actually fares the worst right now. Trump's a few points better, and Haley beats Biden by as much as double digits. I find that interesting, that Trump is doing better than DeSantis versus Biden right now. Okay, so what's the bad news? The bad news is that Trump is a juggernaut with all the presidential inevitability of Hillary Clinton. And we'll go into this. This is not a bash Trump thing. This is let's think through this thing. He is undeniably the most exciting and interesting candidate in the entire presidential field. I can, again, rationally argue that, hey, Haley or DeSantis give us a better shot to remove Biden from the White House. But Trump voters are materially more motivated to head to the polls. We talk about voter enthusiasm. You hear that. And I think one of the things that the conservative principles crowd, I'll include myself in that number. We have these principles of limited government, free markets, personal responsibility, the rule of law. It's easy to argue these things without engaging in the emotion. We just kind of take it out. We say, well, here's a rational argument this, rational argument that. Here's what you need to understand and what I've had to understand. And I am happy to admit when I missed something. And this is what I missed. New Hampshire's important. Not only is it one of the first primary states, but it's not a red state like a Tennessee or Alabama that is just in the tank for Trump. It is what I would call a good representation of the kind of Republicans that you need to convince to win a general election. There was a poll in November. This was Monmouth University, Washington Post. Trump voters are much more likely than other candidates' supporters to say they are extremely motivated to vote in the primary. Trump, 78%. Everybody else, 51%. Trump voters are going to get out and vote. Again, doesn't matter whether you like the guy or not. They're going to get out. 60% of New Hampshire voters said they're fine with Trump or Haley as the eventual nominee. Trump more than doubled Haley's level of voter enthusiasm. Like it was 40% said they're enthusiastic voters to 20. That's something that we have to reckon with. And I think that's something that a lot of the sort of policy wonk types like me have missed of, okay, you can make a rational argument, but people who are into Trump are really into Trump, and people who are really are into Haley and DeSantis right now aren't. It's sort of this like bloodless, I'm making a rational case for them. When we come back from the break, I want to break this down and explain the why. Like why this is happening, because I think that's important to understand where we're going. You're listening to The Matt Murphy Show, and I'm Cameron Smith on Super Talk 99.7. Welcome back. I'm Cameron Smith. I appreciate you guys on the Super Talk text line, 615-737-9986. A couple things that y'all have brought up. Even in the polls, Trump still wins. Haley is uniparty. Y'all with the uniparty. Like, I guess that's just general displeasure that everyone out there is bad. That doesn't seem like a really great governing strategy unless you win a lot more elections. I get lost on the uniparty stuff. The fairness here is, and I've asked a couple of you guys on the Super Talk text line to hear me out on this because I get it. I understand that folks like me make a rational case for why somebody else makes sense. It's, well, why would you risk it? And again, you can tell me why you don't like Nikki Haley. That's fine. I'm simply saying that I don't want Joe Biden to be president, and head to head, she blows him out of the water more than anybody. That's a rational argument. I'm not putting on a Nikki Haley t-shirt. I'm not enthusiastic. That doesn't mean I think that she's bad. It's just that, I know you guys. Some of you guys would swear a blood oath to Donald Trump. And, I don't do that for any politician. I'm a conservative. I don't love politicians. But the enthusiasm's clearly there. And that's something that I've discounted. I've said, well, yeah, but the folks will see that they have options, and then that enthusiasm will kind of split. No, that's just not true. The enthusiasm for Trump actually, and this is what's interesting, and again, I'm happy to admit when I miss some stuff. With Trump, when the charges were levied against him, he got a bump. The enthusiasm doubled down. And some of you guys have said this on the Super Talk text line, that you were on the fence. You were sort of maybe Trump, maybe not. But then when particularly the DOJ went after Trump, it wasn't about, okay, let's look at the specifics of the charges and this and that. It was, is the DOJ basically a Joe Biden political arm going after Trump? And that's how a lot of y'all looked at it was, hey, if a sitting president can use the DOJ to go after his political enemies, we got a big problem. I'm a little curious as to where that concern was when the prior administration kind of did the same thing and has promised to do the same thing. I think it's a terrible idea in either direction, but you can see it clearly. That's what happened is folks said, that locks in my support for Trump. And here's the bigger thing that we keep missing in the discussion, that I keep missing, is this is not about Donald Trump. It's not. Trump has managed to turn himself into an idea rather than a candidate. Because as a candidate, he's just an old guy who runs his mouth a lot. Even you guys who love Trump repeatedly explain, well, we'd like him to not talk as much. We'd like him to be more under control. Well, it'd be nicer if he was a little younger. Like that's conceded. But what isn't conceded is he's an idea. Trump is the biggest thumb in the eye to the political left that a lot of Republican primary voters can muster. It doesn't matter what he says or does because that's not the point. The demand for Trump, if you look at where he is in the primary voting, he's basically stayed the same. Within, call it 9-10 points of that 45, 55 bump up and down, but he's been there and he's been consistent, and that's because nobody's responding to anything. They're not responding to the other debates that he's not participating in. They're not responding to anything he says or does. They're not responding to the litigation. It's, you know what? You're explaining to me why I shouldn't vote for Trump, and I want you to go pound sand. A vote for Trump is opposition to those Ivy League presidents who weren't so sure about whether genocide was a problem or not. Backing Trump means rejecting weird sex books for your kids at the local library. Standing with Trump means you're opposing mask and mandated COVID-19 vaccines. Tell me I'm wrong. But that's where we are. Again, good or bad, take it or leave it. But I'm just saying this is what I'm seeing with great clarity that I missed before, is that somebody that's like, those books are creepy. And they are not appropriate for young kids and not appropriate for my kids. And we've seen what's in them. And you know what? Voting for Trump is a vote against that thing. It doesn't matter whether Ron DeSantis has done more to get those books out or, the policy arguments, or it's Trump is the thing because he's the idea. It's the pushback, which frankly, now I see that. And when I say this, and I know there's some of you listening out there because I can see the split that there's sort of half the Republican primary voters are all in for Trump and the other half are like, not so sure. And they want to explain that none of Trump's electoral symbolism actually connects with reality. But voting for Trump is a way of telling those people to shut up and keep your pointy-headed political thoughts to yourself. It's true. I mean, there are folks that when I just point out like Trump's fiscal record and the trillions that he spent and just start stating facts, they're like, shut up. I'm a Trump voter. Don't care. It's the idea of I'm against fiscal nuttiness, so I'm going to vote for Trump. Well, Trump wasn't fiscally conservative. It doesn't matter. I'm voting for the idea. And so give Trump's credit. No other candidates figured out how to do that, to basically be, I am a symbol of all that you want to fight against. And folks project, it's sort of like Obama was hope and change. Well, no, he wasn't. He was a rank and file liberal if you look at what he actually did. But he was the idea of hope and change. And a future unburdened by the past. Thank you, Vice President Harris. But that idea is something that, is incredibly powerful in the Republican primary. And now we're in a situation where it's down to 3 states. Really. The field must clear within Iowa, New Hampshire, and South Carolina. That's the game plan. And so when we come back from the break, we're going to talk about what that strategy is, if it's a real thing, if we have a race here, or whether this is just done and we need to move on. I'm Cameron Smith. You're listening to The Matt Murphy Show on Super Talk 99.7. And we are back. I'm Cameron Smith. Thank you for the conversation. You guys are rolling on the Super Talk text line, 615-737-9986. One of you mentioned a good point. Cameron, the thing is, I don't see Trump as a politician. I see him as somebody who wants something very simple: make America great. I hear that. I think that's a powerful political argument. The challenge is that's not how politics actually works. Actual governing is about building coalitions and majorities and finding ways to create law. That's what it is. It is complicated. It is difficult. And it is really boring. And so if you want to be good at the thing that matters, trying to convince people that it's really simple and easy misses the point. And look, Trump's not the only person that tries to do this. All politicians do. It's, well, this is easy. Here's all we need to do. Okay. It's just, that's not real. And a couple of things that y'all are pointing out that I think is a very good point is when you get pushed in a direction towards whatever, like if I sit here and I tell you about how Nikki Haley or Ron DeSantis is, you must do this. You must go for them to save America. A lot of you guys are going to be like, no, just because you push that way. And I think that's one of the interesting issues in the Republican Party right now. Several of you have said the same thing. When I referenced the Trump blood oath, several of you pointed out, well, that's the problem, is that we shouldn't have that level of affection for any politician. That we shouldn't do that, and that some of the Trump folks are wild. Yeah. And I guess that's the pushback here. And look, Dan Mandis, he gives everybody that's on the station, he gives them feedback. And one of the things that he tells me is maybe I enjoy poking at folks a little bit much. That I should focus more on, hey, you guys want to get together and have a cup of coffee and hang out and feel good. And he's not right, or he's not wrong. I think that that's important to be relatable, but I also think that it's important, really important, to be honest. And right now, that collision between folks who have political fealty and those who don't is really interesting in the Republican primary. It's just really interesting because the folks that love Trump like more than their families. Like that level of enthusiasm. Like, this is the guy that's going to save us and take us to the promised land. And then the other folks are like, no, he's a weird old guy who's kind of orange. And the chasm between those perspectives is massive. And some folks have said, well, the Republican Party is really two parties. It's all this. I don't buy that yet. But I can tell you, just based on my research and based on what I see, that the enthusiasm for a candidate in Trump is way higher than the Republican Party. So the loyalty lies there, and we need to be real about that. Dan in Nashville, he disagrees. I don't know what he disagrees with what, but let's talk about it. Dan, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can. I can tell you right now, I'm not voting against any of those things that you're talking about. I am voting for Donald Trump.
Why?
Because Donald Trump has already proven to be a leader that wars are not all over the world right now when he was in office. He's proven that he can get the economy in line. He has proven that he is a leader. I'm a small business owner. When Donald Trump was in office, I felt like I had an ally. Don't feel like that anymore. I'm not voting against Joe Biden. I'm voting for Donald Trump. And I think to say that, what you just said about that he's some kind of God to us, you don't understand any of us conservatives. You think we think he's God. And if you think he's more important than our families, you absolutely don't understand a single one of us. None of us think that he's more important than our families. We think he's important for our families. We think that he is important for worship of the Lord and somebody that will fight for us. He got up there and he fought. I can tell you right now, if Donald Trump was in office, the war in the Ukraine would end very, very, very quickly.
How?
The people in the Middle East,
How?
it would end because he got some kahunas that he'd walk up to Putin and say, "Get out of there," and he'd get out of there.
You think
He
so?
wasn't in there when he was there. Absolutely, I believe that.
Okay.
I believe that terrorism in the Middle East would cease very quickly. And the reason being, he's already proven it. Terrorism was everywhere when he stepped in office. 6 months later,
So
where was
what do you
Al-Qaeda?
think about the fiscal conservatism? I mean, his spending through the roof, deficit spending. That's a fact. Does that not bother you?
I'm bothered by any fiscal conservatism in the sense of the spending, but there's more to it than Donald Trump. There is a Congress and there is a Senate. And unlike Joe Biden, Donald Trump didn't go up there and say, "Okay, well, I'm going to control everything." Joe Biden said, "I don't give a rip what the Congress says. I don't give a rip what the Senate said. I'm going to do it my way." Donald Trump didn't do it that way. If he failed from the standpoint that he tried to do politics. And he's not a politician. He's at his best when he is savvy. He is at his best when he is who he is, and that's a businessman.
Why do you think he lost to Joe
America
Biden?
great.
What do you think it was? Why do you think he lost to Joe Biden?
I think Ron Ramos, whatever his name is, pretty much hit it on the nail. I believe that there was a lot of cheating, and I don't believe he lost to Joe Biden. Absolutely, you cannot convince me that he lost to Joe Biden, that Joe Biden got more votes than Barack Obama, that Donald Trump got more votes than anybody in history and lost. That's really interesting. I mean, it's inconceivable that you can go to bed at night and wake up and ahead in every swing state, wake up the next morning and have lost.
Sure, but these things have been over the last several years pretty well litigated, and we've run a lot of stuff to ground.
I think that he lost. You asked why I thought he lost. I thought he lost for that reason. Do I have a problem with the fact that he is boastful? If I had a child and my child was, let's just say, weak, and my child was at school and there was a bully that was bullying my child, I would want my child to be best friends with a bully. And I'm talking about another bully, a bully that could kick the butt of the bully that is bullying him. I don't have a problem with his talk in a locker room. My goodness, did you grow up and live in a locker room? All guys spoke like that. We all spoke like that.
I didn't.
That doesn't make it right.
I didn't.
But it's the way, well, you might not have. I did, and pretty much everybody you speak to out there did. We listened to it. It was just guys being guys.
So let me ask you a question. Let me ask you a question. This is interesting to me. So I've got 4 boys that live in my house, right? And I talk to them about politics, and they know how I vote and stuff like that. Do you think it matters? Because this is the one that gets brought up all the time, right? It's the character. Like, you know that, I know that. Do you think if I told my boys, I said, I don't want you behaving like that guy, but I'm going to vote for that guy. Is that inconsistent, or is that it's fine, it doesn't matter?
I think that you take the whole package, and the whole package is again, would I want my boys to be a bully? No. Would I want my boys to be a friend of a bully if there were other bullies? You dang right I would. And I want them to do everything they could.
But that's
to
not a bully.
bully.
Defending others isn't being a bully. You know that.
Well, you can call it whatever you want to, but when
it's not bullying. I mean, that's defending. That's protecting. That's a different thing.
Okay, well then we could take Donald Trump and we could say that he was protecting our rights by standing up to China, by standing up to Russia, by the fact that Al Qaeda was controlling the Middle East. It's interesting that all the news media absolutely they were showing everything on TV every night until Donald Trump went into office. When Donald Trump went into office, all these reporters were no longer reporting from the Middle East. 6 months later, Al Qaeda ceased to exist. I guarantee you, behind the scenes, there were things happening that you would not have liked, and nobody would have liked. But it's called war. It's what Israel is doing right now. It's the reason that Hamas is running like crazy. It's the reason Israel's going to win the war. And it's something that Donald Trump has that I don't know that Ron DeSantis has. I like Ron DeSantis. I like Nikki Haley. Do I know that they have what Donald Trump has? No, I don't. Do I know that Donald Trump has it? Yes, I do. He's already shown it. He's already proven it.
Sure.
We don't have an untested candidate out there saying, man, I hope that he'll be everything that he says that he'll be. Donald Trump already, he gained the knowledge in 4 years. He should have stayed there because he did win. But despite that he's not in there, he's the only guy that can walk into that office on day one and change the world. He's the only person that can do it.
Well, I don't think I can argue with that point. He can certainly change the world. I don't know how.
Yeah.
Dan, I thank you for the call. And Dan makes a fair point. And I should probably be a little careful with the hyperbole on love Trump more than family. But frankly, I've seen families not talk to each other because of their perspectives on politics. So, yeah, that is actually a thing. The idea that that's not a real thing is just wrong. But I want to be careful about hyperbole, and I do think Dan makes a very important point that there's some people who just say, I love Trump so much. It's all about him. It's not about not liking anybody else. It's not about all this other stuff. I think that's certainly fair. We've got time for, I think, a short call. I've got Shannon talking about Dan Mandis. What you got, Shannon?
I think he gave you some really good advice that you should probably listen to.
Thank you, Shannon. You want to expound on that at all?
Just, I've just been sitting here listening, and I'm not sure what your take on Trump actually is, but, like, my point from the scene, he has had to fight tooth and nail. I've never seen any president have to fight the way he's had to fight. And to be having to fight so much and for things that he did get accomplished was amazing. And I want to see him in another term because he can get rid of all this. He knows what's going on now and who he can mess with, who he can't mess with, what's going on. But if he could just have a normal presidency, just like everybody else, the man he would have more accomplished than we've ever seen in our lifetime. And another reason I like him is because he made us aware of how bad, truly and honestly, news, everything is.
Yeah, and I think my question for you would be, do you think he had any role in, you said normal presidency, you think he had any role in it not being normal?
He was attacked when he came down the escalator saying that he was going to run.
But you think everything he did fine, it was everybody else just kind of descending on him? It's okay if you do. I'm curious. That's what I'm asking.
I just think that he had more obstacles than any other presidency that has been elected.
Yeah, okay. That's a fair take. I appreciate the call, Shannon. Look, I want to be able to engage you guys and have a different perspective on some of this stuff, because this is the crash back and forth. And no, the idea that Chris Christie is some sort of standard bearer for anybody is nuts. That's not a thing. But the idea that there can be disagreement here, the idea that, hey, we have different takes on this. What I've seen is interesting, and I can see it on the Super Talk text line, is you got some folks that are like, why don't you just understand and get your tail in line? And I got other folks sitting over here saying, well, I mean, these Trump folks, they don't want anybody else to have a different opinion. They're going to attack you and come after you. This ain't Reagan's big tent anymore. It's not, hey, the goal is to get Biden out of office. It's, well, if you don't fall in line and get behind the guy, then get out, which, again, is a terrible electoral strategy. It doesn't work. Frankly, I think that's one of the challenges that Trump poses, is that he radically revs up the left, but there's also a portion of the Republican Party that you can see, you can identify it right now, that as enthusiastic as his base is, there's a chunk that's like, eh. And the independent voters, I know nobody wants to hear about it, but that's where these elections nationally are decided. It's not like the Senate, not like the House. These things matter. We got to take a break. We're running over. I'm Cameron Smith. You're listening to The Matt Murphy Show on Superdog 99.7. Man, you guys are exciting today. We don't have long toward the top of the hour, so we'll talk about Iowa, New Hampshire, and South Carolina on the top of the hour. I want to hit a couple things from the Super Talk text line that I think make a lot of sense. Dan and Shannon, again, are talking about the man. That's the conversation that we're having. He is this. He represents this. You're making my point that he is these things. Shannon said, well, he had more obstacles than any president in history. Yeah, I mean, but are we going to say he's a victim? Is that what we want to go with? I don't think so. A couple of them that are really interesting is a couple of you said, you're definitely not voting for Trump in the primary, but you're definitely voting for him in the general. Again, I mean, this is fascinating stuff. And so this is not a situation of, okay, we have to punch each other and, either I got to pick a side where it's I'm on Team Super Trump or I'm a dissenter or whatever. Like, I'm curious. I think Dan did a great job of saying why he's for Trump. I can challenge some of those things from a policy standpoint, but Dan was pretty clear. I think Shannon's take, I'm a little less clear on, which is this idea that, well, Trump, everything was an uphill battle, and so he couldn't get anything done or couldn't do what he needed to get done. And so the idea is that somehow that's going to change if he's reelected. I mean, now if people know who he is, I mean, I would think that sledding would be a lot tougher. So bottom line is, I think this conversation's worth having in terms of where we're going and what the primary looks like. Today, if I'm calling it, Trump's the nominee. That's the thing. It's not close. But I want to talk about what it has to look like for it even to be a context. Again, I don't think it's close right now, but there's a couple things starting to shift. I think it's possible, but not probable. We'll talk about that. We'll talk about DCS. We'll talk about a number of things coming up in the next hour. I'm Cameron Smith, filling in for Matt Murphy, and you're listening to Super Talk 99.7.
From ABC News, I'm Chuck Severson. A funeral in Washington for someone remembered as an iconic figure who broke an important glass ceiling and who changed how people looked at American courts.
President Biden remembered Sandra Day O'Connor, the first woman to serve on the Supreme Court, as gracious and wise, civil and principled.
Sandra Day O'Connor, the daughter of the American West, was a pioneer in her own right.
The president said you didn't have to agree with all of O'Connor's decisions to recognize her principles were deeply held.
Equal justice under law is the noblest aspiration of humankind, and the aspiration of Sandra Day O'Connor, one that she pursued her whole life.
Karen Travers, ABC News, the White House.
Mobilizing to counter missile and drone attacks by Houthi rebels in Yemen on commercial ships in the Mideast, a multinational force that includes the U.S., an Italian frigate, to be among the defensive ships deployed, says U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin, who's in the Mideast.
That operation is bringing together more than a dozen countries from around the world to conduct joint patrols in the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden.
Israel is ready for another humanitarian pause to get aid into Gaza and hostages out, says Israeli President Herzog. Among those calling for those actions, a crowd of people who got through screening okay inside the U.S. Capitol building today, but after they got through, Capitol Police say they arrested 60 of the protesters, signing a bill into law that creates a committee dedicated to studying reparations for the state's black citizens and to create a conversation about slavery and racism. New York Governor Kathy Hochul.
It doesn't mean fixing the past, undoing what happened. We can't do that. No one can. But it does mean more than giving people a simple apology 150 years later.
New York Governor, you're listening to ABC News.
Swallow. Swallow. Welcome back. Bell, don't lead with that. That can get out of hand quickly. I don't know what. I had one of those breakfast bars. It was a little sticky and ugh. Welcome to the second hour of the Matt Murphy Show. I'm Cameron Smith. I'll tell you guys, I'm trying to get to as many of your comments on the Super Talk text line as I can during the breaks, so bear with me. I'm trying to get there. 615-737-9986. Sandra made a really good point. And this is why I brought up Dan's counsel to not poke not poke so much. I'll just read what she wrote because I think this makes sense. I think it's because you try to make people feel inferior if they support Trump, like they haven't thought enough about their choice. Most are tired of the same old in the land of politics. It's all about them, the title, and the next cocktail party. Sandra, I think that's one of the best things that I've heard. Most people are tired of the same old in land of politics. Me too. I'm tired of politicians that lie to folks and say they're some kind of fearless fighter when they can box their way out of a paper bag. There are two types of folks in this world. There's thermometers and thermostats. Some change the temperature, some tell you what it is. Most politicians right now just tell you what it is. Well, the border's being overrun. Joe Biden is corrupt. Hunter Biden is super corrupt. Okay, cool. What are we going to do about it? And what's your plan to do it? Our debt's out of control. We're deficit spending like we're drunk. Yep, all that's true. What are we going to do about it? Thermostat, thermometer. So I'm tired of it. I'm tired of folks lying to you and trying to make you feel better because I don't think you're that stupid. It's not actually because I think that you're inferior and I'm trying to talk down. This is what a disagreement feels like. I'm going to ask questions. I'm going to look at policy. I'm a policy nerd. That's what I do. And so I want to be real clear. I've got a lot of folks in my family that are ardent Trump supporters. I got folks that love Ron DeSantis. I even got some family members that are in Biden camp. Married into that. But you know what? The disagreement and hey, here's why I don't agree with you is not a sign that you are stupid. I think you deserve better. I think that you deserve somebody that treats you fairly and tries to engage you without being a jerk. And this is one of the things that drives me nuts. And frankly, if you want to know the truth, is one of the reasons why I push back is because I've had so many folks try to tell me that if I don't get my tail in line and get on Team Trump, that I'm this and I'm that, and I can't even be a conservative anymore. Well, that's crap. It's not true. And I'm going to push back on that because for the same reason that Trump voters don't like a Ron DeSantis person telling them why they're stupid for voting for Trump. There's that sort of gut reaction of, I'm tired of that. I'm tired of people trying to tell me what I have to do for the future of the country. And look, I look at this differently. As a Christian, my faith is in Christ, period. It's not Christ in some other stuff. And so politics for me is we got to pick people to lead us. And I'd like them to lead us well and have character and all the other good stuff. Sometimes you might have to make choices that you're like, don't love my options, but I'll go in one direction or another. But at the end of the day, I've been through a lot of politicians. You know, I'm in my 40s, and I've already seen a ton come and go. When I worked on Capitol Hill in the House and the Senate, the same people that were there now is a different crew than when I started. So I don't worry about it. I know that y'all love this topic and y'all are engaging and I love it and I appreciate it. I want to talk a little bit about where we are because I think we just need to be honest about it. The whole political, here's who's going to win and this. Right now, this is Donald Trump's primary to lose. Anybody that says otherwise didn't tell you the truth. The only, and I mean only, path for any of the remaining candidates to have a chance goes through Iowa, New Hampshire, and South Carolina. If you'll bear with me, I'm going to pull up sort of where those are in terms of the polling right now. And look, these are averages. It's not set in stone, so you get the idea. The averages for 538 in Iowa has Trump at 50, DeSantis 19.5, Haley 15.2. Everybody else is in single digits or lower. So DeSantis is a couple points the second after Trump. And this is interesting. So that was Iowa. New Hampshire. Trump, 44. This is Real Clear Politics average. Trump, 44.3. Haley, 21.3. Christie, 12.3. And then DeSantis. New Hampshire, obviously, very different than Iowa. And then South Carolina, which is, this is pretty predictable that we'd be here with this because of Haley's connection to South Carolina. Trump, 49.2. Haley, 19.6. DeSantis, 11.2. And notably, Scott's still polling at 8.8. He's more than doubled Ramaswamy. He's not, Scott's not even in the race anymore. So the bottom line is that we got to get to two candidates quickly for anybody else to have a shot. Because if the field stays roughly as it is, it's spread out, even if Nikki Haley and Ron DeSantis split things, neither one of them is going to have a chance. And so right now you've got DeSantis up a little for number 2 in Iowa, and then Haley's got number 2 pretty well locked in New Hampshire and South Carolina. What she would have to do is basically close out the rest of the field and pull in the rest of the non-Trump vote almost perfectly. And that's just, that is remarkably difficult to do. Not impossible, but we're talking highly improbable. So the way I see it, the high probability is that Donald Trump is the Republican nominee for president. Why I titled the column over at AL.com, Republicans have learned to stop worrying and love the bomb. It's from Stanley Kubrick's Dr. Strangelove, those of you who are movie junkies, is that the one path for Joe Biden, and when I say the one, I mean literally probably the only one, is if Trump gets convicted by a jury between now and the election on a criminal charge. I'm not talking about appeals and anything. He gets convicted by a jury. It's like call it an 8 to 10 point swing. Biden wins. So the gambit that Republicans are running with Donald Trump is we're enthusiastic about Donald Trump. We like Donald Trump. He represents the fight against the woke left. The challenge is that, those charges, if there's a jury conviction in the criminal case, Biden's got a pathway to win. Otherwise, he doesn't. Otherwise, Joe Biden is gone. So that's the gamble. That's it. And there's not really an off-ramp. There's no like, oh, just kidding. We charged up to the election. This conviction happens. We would like to go with someone else now. That's not that. There's no path there. So we need to think about that. I'm not saying it's going to change anything at this point. I'm simply saying that's the risk. And I get it. We've had the back and forth, and I understand this. I don't blame people for really wanting to get behind Trump because they're more enthusiastic. They want to turn out and vote. They are excited. And I think the challenge for folks that are saying, well, maybe Nikki Haley, maybe Ron DeSantis, well, maybe do you really care? And I think that's the difference, right? That's the one thing that I think I've consistently missed is that, people who are making a rational, cold case for other candidates, not Trump. And I'm not talking about Chris Christie. And again, I keep mentioning him. Chris Christie is what sort of nominal Republicans who just like somebody that trolls Donald Trump, they like that guy. And it's like 0.5%. It's not really a huge cohort. What we have to realize, though, is this is going to be really interesting as we hurtle towards November. And, okay, I mean, give credit to Trump. He's been consistent in the primary. If you look at his numbers, they're as level as anybody. Again, the only thing that has me sort of like worried is, well, he's basically a de facto incumbent. I mean, and you guys have said this much on the air. You've pointed out, well, hey, he's had that experience. He can hit the ground running. And he's still, as an incumbent Republican, polling at 50, 60% in a Republican primary. I know those numbers are high, and they certainly much higher than the rest of the field. But normally, incumbents don't have primaries. Normally, folks are like, well, they're obviously the answer. And in this case, it's still there, at least nominally for the moment. We'll see if Nikki Haley can make a race of it. I think if anybody can, it's her. I don't think that even her supporters are going to turn out at the levels that are even close to Donald Trump's supporters in the Republican primary. And ultimately, I think, she may make it through those 3 states I mentioned. But after that, man, I mean, it has to be a real throwdown type contest for folks to stay in. And so we'll see what happens. I'm interested. I think there's a lot of upside to having a primary. I think it's dumb that Democrats aren't. I mean, not really. I mean, Joe Biden's your candidate. You can't do better than that. I mean, and several of you pointed this out on the Super Talk text line. Well, what about head-to-head versus Newsom? What about head-to-head? What about head-to-head? I really think that this is ride or die for Democrats in terms of, the risk of Biden. Because Biden's not just a risk in terms of he's got some challenges. He's old enough that if he passed away in office and Harris is the president, I can virtually guarantee you next cycle we're going to have a Republican. Because she's literally the only politician that I think does worse than Joe Biden right now. So I'm glad that we were able to talk about that. I want to...
I'm speaking. Okay?
A future unburdened by the past. I don't know if y'all seen the RNC's 4 minutes of her just saying the future unburdened. No, or what is it? What can be unburdened by what has been. That's it. What can be unburdened by what has been. It's just like word soup, but that's what she likes. When we come back from the break, I want to talk about Satan being beheaded in Iowa. I think that's just a fascinating thing from start to finish there. I want to talk about immigration, DCS issues in Tennessee, and China, Russia, and Iran messing with our elections. Who would have thought? We'll get to all this and more on the Matt Murphy Show. I'm Cameron Smith, and you're listening to Super Talk 99.7. Welcome back. I'm Cameron Smith, filling in for Matt. Man, thank you guys for the engagement here. This is incredible. Sue said something that I think may be the most powerful sentiment on anything I've seen on the Super Talk text line. She said Trump pointed out that they don't hate him, they hate us, and he's just the one standing in the way. For those of you who are students of politics, that is an incredibly powerful political sentiment. To be the barbarians are at the gate and Trump is standing right there. I mean, that's his political campaign. It is extremely effective. And I think one of the things Trump has done better than any politician that I have seen is that he understands how people actually feel. He does. I mean, and Arthur Brooks over at AEI talks about how emotion is the higher order driver for action than reason. And I'm not suggesting that like it's one or the other. Just when the two are in conflict, and he tells a story about Muffin the dog. You should Google it. It's fantastic. It's kind of funny too. But the point he makes is that emotion so often drives our decisions, and Trump knows that. He's responding to how people feel versus trying to make wonky policy arguments. Biden has tried to enter this fray with his like economic stuff and just an abject failure to communicate on this front. Meanwhile, Trump's saying, you know what, your groceries are more expensive. You can't buy a house. How does it make you feel?
I did what I came to do.
Yeah, I guess he did. But, you know, that is so powerful, so salient, and it matters, right? Because people feel about that. And I think that it's really, really important for a lot of voters to be represented in that way, to feel like somebody gets them and understands them, not just manages them. Nobody wants to be managed. And frankly, nobody wants to be politic to either. They don't want somebody that's going to say, well, you know, maybe let me give you my talking points and see how Trump doesn't do that. I mean, if you look at a Trump speech, there is no talking point whatsoever. It's just him freestyling. And I get that. I think in talking about one of the comments, one of the prior callers made, Shannon, I want to clarify on air that she didn't say Trump was the man, but she did say he faced obstacles and he overcame them. Again, I think that's important because I think that connects with people. It's something that they see challenges in their own life. They see Trump challenges as a politician, and they say, okay, cool. That connects, that squares, that makes sense. And I think regardless of what happens in the election, regardless of who the primary winner is, regardless of, oh God, I can't imagine more Joe Biden, but if that happened, there's a moment of reckoning right here for all of the political class on the right, all of Republican land. And one of the things that I think they've missed on wildly is, okay, fine, criticize Trump for the stuff he does that's weird and strange and narcissistic and all that. But he's speaking the language that most of the voters speak and care about, right? What's been wild is to watch a lot of other politicians try to replicate that, like some kind of weird clones, and not really do it very well. Not actually be able to connect with people, not actually be able to speak to where they are in life, not actually say, hey, I'm just in between you and the people who can't stand you. A lot of them look sort of like, well, we're sort of Trumpy-ish, but they can't do it. They can't be that. And I think Ron DeSantis is actually a pretty good example of that. I mean, it's like a policy nerd version of Donald Trump. And man, just on stage, that emotion, that feeling, getting people fired up. It's not there. I'd be lying to you if I told you it was. And so I think that anybody who's running for political office on the right, they need to have policies, they need to have ideas, but man, they got to be able to connect. They got to be able to have those conversations, have them frankly, and people feel like they're just sitting at the kitchen table with somebody that gets them. And so I don't think we should ever, ever, ever discount the lessons learned, through Trump's term, really it was Trump's term. Then, okay, I'm running in 24. So he's had sort of a very long campaign. And I think there's a lot that we have to, and I mean have to, take away here. Otherwise, we're just going to split the Republican Party and Democrats are going to win. That's what's going to happen. And that's, I think, bad for America. I think you need a healthy Republican Party, a healthy Democrat Party, and you need to clash and, let the votes sort it out. One of the things I think, several of you all have mentioned is, well, what did the political class do about elections to make sure they're more secure? Nothing. Well, that's not true. After the last election, there were a ton of states that passed a lot of laws on election security so that we can ensure that we have secure elections. And I think getting back to the point where we say, hey, we have a reason to trust that the election results are there is important, because we had to put stock in something. And if the notion is we can't trust anything, man, we are in trouble. So now on to more exciting topics like Satan beheaded. Okay, if you guys haven't seen this story, y'all are missing out. So in Iowa, at the Capitol, the Satanic Temple puts up a display. And the restriction, and you guys know this, I mean, this is First Amendment, you can have different religious displays, but they have to be different religious displays consistent with the First Amendment, making sure that folks have the ability to be represented. Well, the Satanic Temple of Iowa, which is in and of itself kind of a funny thing to say, had a display depicting the pagan idol Baphomet, I think is how you say it. And they drew the line. They couldn't use an actual goat skull. They had to use a goat skull that was fake. But it looks like something, creepy out of a witch movie. It's got like a shiny goat head and a robe and some candles and some symbols and stuff. And it's next to the stairs and a sign that says Happy Holidays. So it's kind of funny. But there was a former congressional candidate from Mississippi who came in and I guess decapitated it. Its display, the Satanic Temple of Iowa announced on Facebook, its display had been destroyed beyond repair. It looks almost like a glass, I don't know, it's a weird goat head wreathy thing. It's an interesting discussion because Ron DeSantis and other folks, Ted Cruz, had said, we want to put towards the legal defense of this gentleman that cut this down. We'll talk about it on the other side of the break. I'm Cameron Smith, filling in for Matt Murphy. You're listening to Super Talk 99.7. Welcome back. Thank you guys very much for the engagement on the Super Talk text line. It's awesome. 615-737-9986. I wish you guys could see the same screen I see. It is wild because the passionate disagreement from folks who are like in Team Trump and the rest of the field, you know, again, that chasm is real. Like I can literally see it in real time, and the split is very close. It is not, well, we're all, you know, it's 75% this way, 25. It's cut right down the middle. I mean, Republicans have to figure something out. And the number of y'all that seem ready to take your ball and go home if someone disagrees with you in either direction is ridiculous. I mean, come on. It's politics. If people have a different perspective, that means we're free. That's awesome. And so having that back and forth, I think that's one of the mistakes that folks make is when we think that somebody disagreeing with us means they don't like us or they're mad at us or they want to fight us. Like, that's just not true. We're having discussions about pretty important stuff here. So we're going to have different perspectives, even on Satan beheadings. So I want to know what you guys think here, because I think Ted Cruz, Ron DeSantis, other folks, I think Chris Hand said, hey, I want to contribute to this guy's, the veteran who beheaded the Satan statue in Iowa. They wanted to contribute to his legal defense. And I hear that. I get that. As a Christian, the idea of Satan being lauded and worshiped anywhere is abhorrent and awful. So, one, chime in on the Super Talk text line. And two, I want to put a different hypothetical out there, and I want to see if you respond any differently to it. Imagine we have a veteran that attacks a nativity and beheads baby Jesus. Do you want him prosecuted? Would we want to contribute to his legal defense fund? Well, no, I think is the obvious answer. But this goes to the whole point of, okay, well, how do we want to handle this in American society, right? Because we have some pretty strong divergent views along political lines, along religious lines, social lines. I mean, I just found out a couple years ago that there's like 37 genders. And so there are some very strong different perspectives on a lot of this stuff. Does that mean property damage is okay? As long as it's a belief we oppose, then you can do that? So this is one of the hard parts about civil rights and civil liberties, like religious protections. And it's uncomfortable because you see it with speech too. In order to protect the speech that you care about, you have to protect the speech that you hate. In order to protect the religious liberties that matter to my family, I got to protect religions that, frankly, I disagree with. I mean, Christianity is a pretty exclusive claim. It says there's one name under heaven whereby you must be saved. Doesn't say multiple names, doesn't say like player's choice, one name. So it's an exclusive religion by its nature. But if I want to enjoy the protections that the government can't come in and tell me how to worship or what I can do on Sundays or Wednesday nights or the Bibles that I can have in my home that I read with my family, I think the answer is I got to protect it for faiths that I hate. You know, Satanism being one that I'm pretty sure that there's not a lot I can connect with there. But I use that counterexample for a reason, that if a veteran had attacked a nativity and beheaded baby Jesus, that's still property damage, right? And I think about the George Floyd protest and the looting. Well, I didn't like that. I didn't like the looting. I didn't like the idea that you have a political cause and therefore you can go damage other people's property. So, what about when I have a religious disagreement with your display? Well, then what? And maybe I'm overthinking it. But I think we probably have to be consistent here. And yes, Jason, I know the first rule of Satan Club is that, he cannot be in the Satan Club. This is Bell. First rule of Satan Club is you do not talk about Satan Club. I mean,
and the second rule is if it's your first time at Satan Club, you have to Satan.
Yeah, we've talked about this with Matt. We know there's a lot of real specific rules for Satan Club, but this seems strange. This to me, one, that this is happening on multiple fronts. In the same week, we get a story about after school Satan Club, and then we get the Satanic Temple is moving in Iowa. And this seems so weird to me that we actually have to talk about this, that this is real. And okay, we got some super comments here. If you've ever visited the Church of Satan website, I haven't, so I don't know. The Satanic Commandments are pretty short. There's very little to almost nothing about actually worshiping Satan. It's mainly about the worship of oneself and obtaining for oneself and living for oneself. So it's basically selfishness on the altar of Satanism. I mean, that does seem pretty satanic. That checks out. That's pretty consistent. It's sort of evil is good, that type of thing. But it's real weird that this is now more of a thing, right? That this is percolating up. My suspicion when Matt and I talked about this is that this is an effort to create some of these overreactions and then use those for litigation purposes. To have, for example, a school district say, we won't allow equal access to Satan Club in order to litigate and ultimately force the issue. Same thing likely with the displays. And so I don't know. I feel kind of both ways about this in terms of I don't like it. We're seeing more of this stuff pop up, but also our civil liberties, we need to be consistent and protect them because I don't want to get trapped. Jason thought the first rule of Satan Club was no air conditioning. That is also probably another good rule. But I think it has to be. We do respect the rule of law. The Constitution's protections on religious liberties have to be respected across the board so that if you choose to damage somebody's property because you disagree with their religious perspectives, you get punished. There are legal penalties for that. If for example, somebody says, well, I don't support Islam, therefore I'm going to drive my car into a mosque and damage the mosque, well, you're going to get arrested. You're going to get prosecuted. That's a reality. And so I understand the sensational nature of Satanism itself. It's edgy and it's something that sort of shocks the conscience that it's around. And certainly for after school Satan camp in Tennessee, that's not a common occurrence. That's not a thing that we're regularly able to see. So a good question on the Super Talk text line. Is there a Christian statue at the Iowa Capitol? I don't know the direct answer to this, but I do understand about the display issue. So, for example, if you have the 10 Commandments, like in the U.S. Capitol, you have Solon, Moses, the lawgivers, right? So as part of a historical setup, okay, like that's allowed. If you have it as this one religion gets more showtime and it's not equal access across different religions, then you start to have a problem and potentially a cause for litigation. That's basically what we're talking about here. And so Love one of the super text lines point out Jesus said, love your enemies. Doesn't mean condone their behavior, but love your enemies, pray for those who persecute you. Yeah, I think that's right. Somebody else mentioned the Satan Club thing sounds like a lure to me, like a trap waiting for Christians to take the bait. I think that's right. I think that's a fair take on this initiative here. It is to create these traps, because I just don't think the popularity of, a religion based on selfishness is called TikTok. You don't need the weird goat heads. Selfishness is endemic in our culture. It's everywhere. And so the idea that that's really what we're talking about here, I mean, no, I think we're talking about something more. The idea that we can mainstream Satanism. And I do think we should push back on that. Now, in terms of protections and government buildings and things like that, that's one thing. But pushing back on this idea that this is just sort of normal and this is just a little thing, no, it's not. I mean, we really need to talk about where our culture is the day that we're like, yeah, sure, kids, you want to go to after school Satan Club. I mean, that is bonkers. And I remember when I was a kid and, these things were mentioned in hushed tones. They talked about the black mass and the sacrifices. And I have no reason to believe any of that was true, but it was like it's stuff from a horror movie. This is more, oh, see, look, it's harmless. It's fine. It's not even, don't worry about Satan and the Dark Lord. This is more about you. Just take a selfie with the satanic statue. Yes, Jason, the text line is a trap to lure in the host. Yes, I cannot ignore it and focus on the show. I have to engage you guys because it's your show. At the end of the day, that's the reality. But your show is paid for by advertisement. So we have to take a break. I'm Cameron Smith, filling in for Matt Murphy on Super Talk 99.7. Welcome back, folks. Man, you guys are great. This has been a lot of fun. And one of you guys said, I'll just read it. You're right on the mark, bro. Conservative Christians have to drop their elitist attitude and realize that defacing property isn't okay just because it's a view you don't agree with. That's just redneck, not Christ-like. Redneck, not Christ-like. That's an interesting one. But hey, I want to address one thing as we head to time flies when you're having fun. But as we head to the break, I want to address the reality. Ray holds me accountable. Ray is here and Ray engages. First of all, Ray, I'm impressed that you listen to this much radio. I mean, it is truly impressive. So Super Talk 99.7, salute you. But the disagreement and the back and forth, I want to talk a little bit about Dan, one of the prior callers. I really respected Dan because Dan goes toe-to-toe. Dan said, hey, no, you said that Trump's a symbol and these things, but I like Trump because of this. And he went down the list of why he's a Trump guy. And he wasn't backing down. He wasn't like, Cameron, you upset me with your questions. You hurt my feeling. He was like, no, I disagree. I think you're wrong. And I asked him questions. We had a back and forth. And I think that's great. I thought it was excellent. And I don't know whether it was COVID or what it was that made people really unable to handle disagreement, to handle the back and forth and the exchange. Stop being snowflakes. We're all adults here. I can't imagine that the demographics for this radio station, hit that 13-year-old population really heavily. Most of us who are listening to this radio station are adults. And we need to have that back and forth. We need to go toe-to-toe. We need to disagree. And the idea that there's only one way and it's your way and it's the righteous way, that's a lie. This stuff is complicated. We're having the back and forth. That's it. And I'm going to be wrong too. It's not the idea that I'm very smart and I know many things and I have many leather-bound books that smell of rich mahogany. That's not it at all. It's you have to be willing to have the discussion and be right and wrong from time to time. And I can't stand it when folks on the left talk about speech being violence and they're going to have to go home and they need to find a safe space because somebody said some words that just really were hurtful. Well, I see it. I can literally pull it off the super text line.
I thought it was silence that was violence.
Silence?
I get confused.
Silence is violence. Speech is violence. All the violence. That's not a thing. And so, Dan, I don't know if you're still listening, but I appreciate not only you listening, but you calling in and being like, no, I think you're full of crap. Because that exchange is good. It is useful. The one where it's like, I'm going to take my ball and go home. I'm never listening again. And then somebody waits a few minutes and they say, I'm still not listening. I'm still not listening. Really? Nobody believes you. Hey, and there's Joe. Understands the Anchorman reference. That is something that I can get behind. The Legend of Ron Burgundy right there. Also like some good Parks and Rec too. There's a lot of different options here. Guys, this has been a fantastic conversation. Let's keep it rolling.
You are kind of a big deal.
Well, my cologne has bits of Panther in it. Real Panther. This is Cameron Smith filling in for Matt Murphy, and you're listening to Super Talk 99.7. Come back.
It's 2 o'clock. I'm Mac Maury with your top stories. Right now, 42 degrees, a sunny day on Music Row. We got a weather forecast coming up in just a couple minutes. New York's governor signs legislation to create a commission on slavery reparations in the state. Here's Derek Dennis.
It'll be a 9-member appointed commission charged with making recommendations, including new policies and or potential payouts to descendants of slaves in New York. Governor Hochul signing legislation to create the commission, saying it's overdue.
To those who think that even having this conversation is unfair or wrong, I say it would be wrong not to have it.
Slavery was made illegal in New York in 1827, but supporters of the bill, including the Reverend Al Sharpton, say there's still a racial wealth gap in the state today that needs to be rectified.
I want to give credit to this governor.
And right now in Tennessee, the state is suing the world's largest financial asset manager, BlackRock, in a first-of-its-kind lawsuit alleging the firm has harmed consumers through its environmental and climate strategy goals, or ESG policies. State Attorney General Jonathan Skrmetti tells WTN's Nashville's Morning News.
If investors want to invest in ESG, this is America. They can choose to do that. Companies can sell them products that do that. The key is they have to be honest about it. They got to be transparent about whether a particular investment is being managed in a way that furthers environmental goals or whether it's strictly being managed in a way that furthers return on investment.
And the lawsuit seeks injunctive relief, civil penalties, and recoupment of the state's costs. That is the latest news. Weather's next. I'm Mac Morey, WTN News.
Welcome back for the final hour of the Matt Murphy Show. I'm Cameron Smith. One of the things that's been fantastic, and frankly, I appreciate it very much, is some of the feedback that you guys have offered in terms of style points. the slow approach of, hey, relax, let folks kind of just vent and do their thing. One of the challenges, and I probably should have said this at some point, I don't think I've actually mentioned it, but my background is a lawyer. So there's a tendency for me to want to cross-examine. So when we're talking and have the conversation, it's not a...
Wait a minute. You're a lawyer?
You didn't know that?
Aren't you supposed to be on the bottom of the ocean?
I think that's Bin Laden, Bill. Same, different. But yeah, I think that that's a fair point, because you know who else says that? My wife. She's like, you will not lawyer me. Nope, we are not doing this exchange where we go back and forth and you think it's some sort of combat. I just want to talk about what we're having for dinner. And so I appreciate that. And I definitely, I take that into consideration, because for Matt and Chris and Dan and Brian and the folks that are here day in and day out, they have the ability to kind of tweak and refine that over time. You know, it might be a minute between times I host shows, and I want to be better all the time. So that really, really, really matters. And, you know, come on. I'm also having fun with the snowflake thing. If you're literally texting me, telling me you're going to take your ball and go home, really? Like, I just have to call that out. I'm not going to let that go, because I think I don't want us to be like liberals. I don't want us to be like, your speech is violence. That's not a thing. It's not. And I think that's my goal, is I don't believe in the Liz Cheney approach to all this is just dumb, which is, I want to be applauded by the left and not connect with anybody on the right. But I think that Republican Party's got to hold together. There's got to be room for differences of opinion, and sometimes those are intense. You know, my dad and I go round and round about this stuff. He tells me like it is, and I said, it is not like that. And it makes a lot of fun. So I think that your feedback is well placed. I appreciate the encouragement, and I appreciate the folks that are like, hey, you should be punched in the face. Because I think that's the reality right now, is we got a lot of folks all over the place who have real strong opinions. We have a lot of folks on the Super Talk text line that know way more about Satanism than I do. And it is like a masterclass on what is Satanism actually. I just really haven't given it much thought, but I do think, you know, some of this stuff is a trap. I mean, some of this stuff is designed to bait folks into overreaction. And the fact that it was a former candidate for office that did it, I mean, come on, folks. A lot of the stuff that we see right now is political show. Like, welcome to the machine. If you've ever done cable news or anything like that, you get a call ahead of time, and it's basically point, counterpoint. Here's what we need you to say. You say that thing. If you don't say that thing, they go to somebody else. And it's designed to be theater and designed to just pull you in, because it's that combative thing, but it's not real. You know, so much of this stuff it's just fake. It's entertainment, much like watching a movie. What isn't fake is what's happening over at the Department of Children's Services in the state of Tennessee. Some of you guys know that my family is a therapeutic foster family. We work with an agency called Youth Villages. It's something that we feel very strong about. Every kid deserves a chance. I can jaw about politics all day long, but when it comes to kids, I take it real seriously. I'm concerned that the state of Tennessee is probably not taking it as seriously as it needs to. And I think one of the mistakes that happens on these issues is, well, it's a government bureaucracy, so we don't like that. Well, we're funding it more and more in the state of Tennessee. We're throwing more money at the challenge that's facing kids in Tennessee. But I think we actually need to lead on this. And there needs to be I understand that everybody wants to be on the same team all the time, but I really think the legislature specifically needs to hold the Lee administration accountable here. And I'm not talking about rubber stamp stuff. You guys know what I'm talking about, where it's, oh, cool, we had a hearing. We heard from the commissioner over there, Margie Quinn, and, she said a thing, and so that's the thing. I think we need to, if we want to help Commissioner Quinn, if we want to help DCS, we've got to hold them actually accountable. We've got to actually have meaningful hearings. We've got to actually say, wait a minute, I got 2 whistleblowers that are saying you asked them to fabricate a report, and you're saying you didn't. Well, that can't be the end of that. Like, that can't just be a thing that's a flash in the pan, because here's the deal. The situation at DCS has been awful. And to her credit, it was not Commissioner Quinn that caused it. When I say the problems seem insurmountable at DCS, that is not an exaggeration. The comptroller's report that highlighted all this stuff was ghastly. But one of the things in addressing any of this that we cannot have is trying to present things as better than they actually are when they're not. That's a deal breaker for me. If that is happening, then folks need to be replaced. If the issue is we got a long way to go, I'm all in, let's go. But some of the situations that I have personally observed and seen suggest that, like, we need more sunlight and more sunshine on this, and we need to be paying attention. There are thousands of kids that need a place to go. And one of the things that y'all have heard about it, I've said it on this station, other folks have mentioned it, that, we had kids who were removed from parental custody that stayed in state office buildings because we didn't have a place. And now we have some of these transitional homes, which are basically short-term placements for kids while they're figuring out where to place them in the foster system. We need to understand what's happening in these places, and not because we need to play gotcha, but just because it's, anytime a kid's taken out of a situation that requires them to essentially be removed from their own families, it's pretty severe. So there's a lot of trauma, a lot going on, and we need to make sure they're going into safe environments. We don't need layers and layers and layers of bureaucracy, but we absolutely need to pay attention to what's happening here. And with our experience, one of we've seen a couple things, and I want to highlight a couple of them. Love your thoughts on this. First, I've been to the Bartlett campus in Memphis. This is a residential facility where kids, it's awful, just to be blunt. Now, I've worked with youth villages, and there's a lot of things positive about youth villages. The Bartlett campus right there is rough. There's kids in the foster system are level 1, 2, 3, 4. And those level 4s that can't be placed out, they got to have some place to go. That's always going to be the case. And there's some kids that just may not be safe in a family setting. That's awful. It's terrible. We got to have answers there. But some of the stuff at Bartlett is a shop of horrors. And we had a son for a year who we learned all about it. We learned about what happened there. I don't want to go into too much detail because some of you guys know our family and know folks, but the bottom line is, if we don't have political accountability in this space for literally the most vulnerable people in our state, we have a massive, massive problem. And there's something wrong with us. Even some of the basics here, like if you go to DCS and you say, I'm interested in fostering, they'll tell you to go get a home study. That's about $1,000. My family did that. And then we connected with youth villages, and they said, well, you got to do another home study. That home study doesn't count. We didn't have to pay for it the second time, but we had to do another home study. And it's that type of process and competence that turns people away from the foster system and not wanting to be a part. And I get it. This is not as sexy as talking about the presidential primaries and stuff like this, but it's actually important. And until we have transparency there, And here's one of the things that DCS has done that I think is a major problem, is they've said because we have privacy issues with minors and children, then the agencies should have privacy. Absolutely not. The children's privacy must be protected. The agency's privacy should never be protected because those are public dollars going there. The head honchos over at DCS have made more than they've ever made. And so there needs to be real accountability there. And what happens is because, well, we don't want folks to, see these kids, they basically have a lockdown on a lot of the information. And we need to have better information. We need to have better engagement there. I've seen some of the left of center outlets highlighting some of these problems. I haven't seen a lot of conservatives saying, hey, this is a thing. Well, if you're pro-life, this is a thing. If you're saying every life matters, all lives matter, that stuff, this is a thing. If you're saying you can't handle government waste, this is a thing. If you don't want to see state bureaucrats further traumatizing kids, this is the thing. And I think this is where it's easy to kind of just keep this stuff out of sight, out of mind, but this is real and it's problematic. And the worst thing, we've talked about educational choice. The worst thing is, think about it this way. Every time a kid is, they call it disrupted. Every time a kid is moved from one house to another house or moved from their home to a facility or whatever, they lose serious educational progress. And right now, I've had 2 foster sons that are long-term placements, and both of them have had IEPs. And we had to go and apply and try to do these individual education plans to try to catch them up. And it's almost impossible. And it's impossible because these kids are behind and there's not a game plan. And then even when you get the resources and help you need to help these kids out, it is so much work to establish eligibility and do this stuff. And for me, if there's a kid in the foster system, they should have automatic IEP eligibility. They should automatically have the school say, hey, we're going to come up with a custom game plan to help get you as caught up as much as possible. Because they're naturally behind. We know it. It's documented. It's a matter of, well-documented research and what happens to these kids. And again, because there's no advocate here. There's nobody saying, hey, these kids are, you don't make a lot of money off these kids. This isn't a banking industry or something like that. This is, how do we take care of these kids? How does the state take care of these kids? This has got to be an issue for conservatives. We'll talk about it a little bit more. I'll get to some of your comments on the other side of the break. I'm Cameron Smith, filling in for Matt Murphy on Super Talk 99.7.
The American Civil Liberties Union has filed a lawsuit against Texas. We'll tell you what for, plus child rape in Tennessee. That and more 30 minutes after the hour of 2 o'clock. Super Talk 99.7 WTN.
Well, thanks, Mac. That's traumatic. I mean, yikes.
Do what I can.
Thank you. Ow.
Sorry.
Okay. We can make it. So going back to the fostering stuff, after Mac completely derailed my train of thought, thank you. Several of you made a good point that it's not just dogging DCS is not a thing. Like just saying, oh, everybody there's bad. It's not true. Like there's some fantastic people over there. I think the problem is making sure that it's not a throw a money at it thing. It's, okay, do we have the right leadership in the right places? If we have folks that have been there a long time, is it their leadership that has caused some of the problem? Are they jaded? Do we think, they've changed over there to the motto kids first. And I think that's the right mission. I think they're really figuring some of that stuff out. And frankly, DCS does a lot more than we realize because it's not just fostering and stuff like that. It's family services, things to help folks be able to keep their families together. Intact families is something that's really, really important from a public policy matter. And I think we're not getting that. And I am a huge proponent of fostering. It is difficult. It's at times insane. Our son, for example, my wife called into the house and our son, who's been with us for several months now, answered the phone and that was it. He just answered it, but didn't say anything. And my other son says, you have to say hi. And that sounds like really intuitive and kind of strange, but for some folks who haven't had much teaching at all, like they got to learn a lot of stuff and they got to learn it fast. And so it's like crash course on life and bringing folks up to speed and doing the best you can to support them and help them. But it's really important and it's really rewarding. And so I will say, for those of you that are thinking about fostering or getting engaged, you're going to see the horror stories. Whatever you do, do not go on one of the Facebook groups, like support groups, because it's all the worst stories. Like, it's not horrific in a lot of cases. It's actually really positive, and it gives you the opportunity to serve, but ask questions. I think that's one of the things that has been a major shortcoming of DCS is it hadn't done a good job on communicating. It hasn't done a good job of asking and saying, hey, Tennesseans, we need this many homes. Like the statistical information is out there, but they haven't done a good campaign to really push that out there. I mean, I've told them that. I've talked to folks over there and said, you got to come up with a way to ask for help. And if my stuff's publicly available at D. Cameron Smith on Twitter, you can go to AL.com/opinion. You can go to the Tennessean. Like my email and stuff's out there. I don't care who you are. If you've got questions about fostering or how to connect, I'm happy to help you engage because what we do to these kids says what kind of people we are. It says what kind of conservatives we are. Because this is literally a system that's the state parenting children. From a conservative standpoint, it does not get more terrifying than that. In fact, we should find ways to, as best we can, and this is a pipe dream because, frankly, some kids just can't be placed. But for the kids that can be placed, we should take as many of them out of the system as we can. We should say, you got a place, you got a home, in our homes, in our communities, in our churches, like you can belong, you can matter. And it is tough. My brother has several foster kids that they're going back to their family. The goal is family reunification. That's really important. And that's tough as a foster parent to say, hey, you got to go back. Like your family's doing better. But again, it's to help protect intact families. That's what we want to do. If you're pro-life, if you care about this, please do it. Please think about it. Please ask questions. If nothing else, do the training. Take a minute to, and all this stuff's free, right? They have trauma-informed parenting. Normally, I would want you to punch me in the face if I said a public resource is just the best resource and it will help you. This is an exception to that rule. Trauma-informed parenting is some of the best training that I've ever done. Now, some of the other continuing education stuff for fostering is weird, but trauma-informed parenting has been great. It has made me a better parent to all of my kids. It has helped me understand how to communicate better. And frankly, it's made me understand politics. That when people are angry and fired up, they can't reason. They can't have a conversation. They just want to run, fight, or freeze. And so when you learn about that and you understand that, it changes the way you communicate. And several of you have talked about your spouses that are engineers or lawyers, and apparently that sort of aggressive interrogation style is not limited to just me. But learning that, hey, when people are real fired up, they don't want to talk. Those are the three responsive: run, fight, or freeze. And we shouldn't want that. We should want to be able to help folks. And so I work with youth villages, and they're great. That's therapeutic foster care. That's a little bit different. You should check that out too. I'm not getting paid by any of them to say any of this stuff. I am not an employee of DCS. I think this is one of the most important things we do as a society. I think it matters deeply. Because a lot of us have beliefs and a lot of us have things we want to see. But if you're willing to take care of a kid that was originally not one of yours, I take you seriously, because you're living a life that says I care about more than just myself and what's mine. And, all the parents out there, all the folks that engage this system and do it well, I really do appreciate you. Those kids appreciate you, and this is the children's services, environmental protection. I mean, there's certain different agencies and areas where conservatives have to engage better. You don't have to do it like the left. You don't have to do that, throw money at it and expand your bureaucracy, but you do have to take the issue seriously. And I don't want to surrender that ground. I don't want it to be, Heidi Campbell and other Democrats trying to, engage DCS and hold them accountable while Republicans are just kind of slapping each other on the back. Absolutely not. We need to get this right. We need to work together. We need to figure it out. And we need unmistakable transparency here. We got to take a break. We only got 30 minutes left today. But I've appreciated you guys. I'm Cameron Smith, filling in for Matt Murphy on Super Talk 99.7.
.2:30, I'm Mac Morey with your top stories. Right now, a chilly day on Music Row, but that sun is shining. Currently 41 degrees. Got a weather forecast, just a couple minutes. The first challenge has been filed to Texas. New law makings entering the state illegally a crime under state law. Alex Stone with details.
One day after Texas Governor Greg Abbott signed the bill into law giving local police authority to arrest and prosecute people under a state law of entering Texas illegally, the ACLU and the Texas Civil Rights Project have now filed a lawsuit challenging it. They claim SB 4 violates the supremacy clause of the U.S. Constitution because immigration enforcement is by law handled by the federal government. It's a case that could go to the Supreme Court.
Some crime in Tennessee. Channel 4 says that a Nashville private investigator, 41-year-old James Searcy II, has been arrested for allegedly raping a 12-year-old girl multiple times. Searcy is accused of assaulting the victim at his Ashland City home between November of 2022 and December of this year. He was arrested yesterday after officers executed a search warrant at his house. The investigation began just more than a week ago after Metro Police received information about the case. And an out-of-this-world video makes a lengthy journey. Here's Sherry Preston.
High-definition TV from 19 million miles away. To you, that might sound like just a nice tune, but in reality, it's a video that NASA has beamed back to Earth using lasers. The video is of a cat named Taters chasing a laser pointer, part of a demonstration of technology that allows data to fly through space even faster than many broadband connections here on Earth.
And that is the latest news. Weather's next. I'm Mac Morey, WTN News.
We are flying through the afternoon. I'm Cameron Smith. Welcome back. Matt is vacationing, and I will be here the rest of the week. So noon to 3, I appreciate
Still no
you.
excuse for being lazy and not showing up for work.
Vacation is not an excuse. He still loves you. It's okay, Belle. You can put up with me for a couple of days. And then Mac has to deal with me the next week. So,
oh no.
Hey, come on. You think we're having fun now?
Oh, it's going to be a blast.
Wait till I'm guest hosting Chris's show. This is going to be exciting. So a couple things on the Super Talk text line that I wanted to address. With fostering, it's the not knowing what we're getting into. Like, we don't want a sociopath in our house. I agree. I'll say I've gotten to know the police quite well. I've had a lot of things happen in my house that I never thought would. That's part of what you're dealing with. You're shouldering the trauma that these kids have been through. So I tell folks that, like, look at where you are in life. I mean, if you're in the chaos of little kids, it may be really tough to foster. And I'm not suggesting that everybody needs to have foster kids. I am saying that if you're capable and if you're at a point in your life where you've got the capacity and bandwidth to engage and help shoulder the trauma facing a kid, please do it. There's a lot there. I mean, you learn about reactive attachment disorder. You learn about all the fun things that have been meted out on these kids. And this is a really interesting concept of, through no fault of their own, many of these kids have real trauma and real things that they're working through, educational deficits, all kinds of things. But ultimately, they're going to be accountable for it. Like, they're going to be accountable for the choices they make. And so helping them order their emotions, kind of figure out life, understand a couple more things, and help them have a better jumping off point really matters. It's a big deal. And so, yeah, it's fair to say there's a lot of uncertainty there. And so, be aware of the context, because the worst case scenario for these kids is, hey, we bring you in, but we're not prepared. We didn't really ask the right questions. We didn't go through the training and counseling and things we needed to do to get to where we could help. And then that kid gets disrupted again. Like, wait till you're at a point where you can actually engage and then do it. Because I didn't ask all the right questions, and it was wildly challenging. And, being able to answer those questions for others now is really encouraging to me. But I'll just sort of put a bow on this one. I'm going to keep talking about what's going on at DCS and what we need to. And several of y'all have offered to talk to me about information you have. I think it's just important that the information gets out there, that we have the opportunity to look at the challenges and see what we can do to help. And not look at this as a gotcha game, not look at it as, well, these folks are bad, but look at it as, how can we help the kids? How can we support these kids? How can we give them a fair shake? How can we give them a chance when life hasn't done that? And the adults in their lives have radically let them down. So if you have any other questions, reach out to me. I want to engage you guys on that. There was a report, and this is so funny. In prepping for the show today, there was a report from the National Intelligence Council that was declassified on December 11th. And it's a report. It's from December 23rd of 2022. This is talking about the midterm elections. And some of it's redacted, but it's talking about foreign threats in the 2022 elections. And it is wild, because the key takeaways are this, basically. China approved efforts to influence some midterm races involving members of both political parties. And I want to be real clear about the language here. They basically went after U.S. politicians who were anti-China and tried to support others they viewed as more pro-China, Democrats and Republicans. They really like magnifying the sense that the West is chaotic and that we have these societal divisions and democracy is bad. That's kind of China's engagement here. Iran is engaging they don't have as many resources, so they're sort of small fries, according to the report. The Russian government and its proxies, I'm quoting here from the report, sought to denigrate the Democratic Party before the midterm elections and undermine confidence in the election, most likely to undermine U.S. support for Ukraine. It's wild how they do it here. And they mentioned Cuba and some others. But what it points out, actually, is really interesting, is that these foreign actors are absolutely trying to engage our elections writ large, but they're not as interested in attacking the election infrastructure because it's decentralized. So what does that mean? It means that the voting machines and things like that are more hardened targets. They're not connected to each other. It makes it really hard for these countries to go in and alter vote totals and things like that. What it doesn't say is that what they are doing is engaging in what they call malign activities. They're amplifying, quote, authentic U.S. public narratives to try to influence electoral outcomes, increase mistrust in U.S. election processes, and stoke socio-political divisions. This approach provides deniability as foreign actors propagate U.S. content to try to exploit existing fissures. Basically, they're pouring an accelerant on what we were already doing. So we might have disagreements as a matter of policy or whatever. They're basically amplifying those and trying to get us into a fever pitch. And this is from the report. Again, notably, we have not seen persistent foreign government cyber efforts to gain access and to tamper with U.S. election infrastructure. That's like hard voting machines and stuff like that. Since the presidential election in 2016, when Russia almost certainly reconnoitered election networks in all U.S. states, I think they did reconnaissance on them, and accessed election-related infrastructure in at least 2 states. So again, they're saying they're not really going after the hardware anymore. They're going after basically sowing distrust in democratic processes, online misinformation campaigns. They're trying to do that to us. And our intelligence community has actively picked up on that. And they're letting us know this. This is now declassified. And what's really interesting is they're trying to portray the U.S. democratic model as chaotic, ineffective, unrepresentative, and frequently, for example, China wanted to highlight U.S. divisions on social issues like abortion and gun control. So the idea that this is not happening at all, and again, there's a lot of redacted portions in this because it's intelligence gathering, so sources and methods are out, they're not saying how they got all the information. But I think it's really interesting that, this is an open acknowledgement that those countries we thought were messing with stuff are. Now, they may not be doing it in the way that a lot of us kind of assumed, which was the election infrastructure, but they are absolutely trying to spin us up into chaos. And, we should be mindful of that. Do I necessarily want a government censor in here? No. But then the subsequent question is, well, what do we want? How do we want to address the reality of foreign countries coming in and pushing social narratives into our phones that don't reflect what's actually happening in America? That's pretty messed up. That truly is concerning, that we would have China, Russia, Iran, Cuba, others with that level of capacity. Because instead of saying, well, we got to find a way to hack into secure election systems, it's, well, why don't we just see if we can play with their brains? We can run social media campaigns. We can do all this stuff. And yes, some of the social media companies are doing different things to combat that. but not all of them, and certainly not all of them consistently. I think that's one of my concerns about some of the censorship is, well, I don't want to actually censor Americans with perspectives. I want to censor foreign actors who are intentionally trying to make a fake perception of what America is really like, where some of these social media companies say, well, here's some opinions we think are misinformation, therefore we need to censor those. There's a real difference between the two. One is basically a fake narrative. One is a narrative the social media company doesn't like. And we've seen some of that in the difference between some of the platforms like Facebook and then X is, okay, well, what's the dedication to just freedom of exchange and expression? What's the censorship model? And I think we should want to know those. We should want to know how the different social media companies approach this. One of the articles that I'm writing next is basically how much media we're consuming here, how much we're consuming in terms of just hours and hours of this stuff a day, and how much it actually shapes our brains. So we got to pay real close attention here. We got to take one more break. We'll come back. We'll wrap everything up. You guys have been great. I'm Cameron Smith, filling in for Matt Murphy on Super Talk 99.7. Welcome back, folks. Y'all been great today. This has been awesome. We have the indomitable Brian Wilson up next. Brian?
Indomitable.
Indomitable.
Indomitable. That's a hard word.
It is.
Too many syllables in there.
Well, what you got, man?
Well, I mean, I've got all kinds of stuff. I mean, I've been looking a lot at the story with regard to the border. I mean, it just...
Yes.
When you look at it, you say, well, I've done this story, but then you say, it's worse. And every single day this week, it's gotten worse and worse and worse. And right now, there's a big fight in Washington about what are you going to do about it? Are you going to fix it? Because you can't have any money for Ukraine or Israel, Mr. President, until you fix it. And it doesn't, now it's sounding like they're not going to do anything until after the new year. So I don't know. I don't know what's going on.
Well, Brian, doing things is tough.
That's right. Accomplishing things is tough. And then, I don't know if you've been following it, but there's this outrageous sex scandal on Capitol Hill where apparently they went into the Hart 216. You ever been to Hart 216?
Yeah.
And the Hart building, that's one of the big hearing rooms up on Capitol Hill. Well, apparently somebody went in there after hours and filmed a porno video. And
this would be the Cardin staffer.
Yes, that's the Cardin staffer. And it's he says he's, you see these stories say, well, he's very angry about it. But then they caught up with him in the parking lot, Senator Cardin, and he doesn't seem to be all that angry about it.
It's so bizarre. I didn't know which sex scandal you were talking about.
Well,
so, you have to be very specific.
It is Washington, after all. You're right about that.
Well, that story blew my mind. Blew my mind.
Anyway, just trying to stay warm on a cold winter's day because it was. I got up this morning and it was flat cold, and so that's the goal. Is that we were doing well there for a while. We were in the 60s in December, and then all of a sudden the bottom fell out. So.
I got to go wrap my fig tree. I literally put it in a cocoon over the winter so it doesn't get killed by the hard freeze.
Last year we had one really bad freeze. And I'm telling you, all of the shrubbery around my house is still looking pretty rough from that. Some of it has come back, and I thought I'd give it a year. And if it doesn't come back by the spring, then I'm going to have to start replacing a bunch of stuff because I'm telling you, that really took its toll. I mean, we're just not used to what we got down below zero. That was rough.
Well, Brian, I'm excited about your show, and I'm looking at these southwest border land numbers. I couldn't get to it. They wanted to talk about so much other stuff. I couldn't get to it. I'm glad you're getting to it because, man, what's happening on the southern border is
remarkably
wild.
Unbelievable, right, yeah.
Almost 2.5 million encounters on the southwest border last year. 2.5 million. That's larger than some states. Thank you. Go listen to Brian. You're listening to Cameron Smith, filling in for Matt Murphy on Super Talk 99.7.